Welcome back to Echo Ridge, where today we're going to be building a niobium tamer, and this method is easier than you'd think. A quick Google search of niobium tamers reveal all sorts of contraptions, often taking up a big footprint and requiring multiple steam turbines. When I told my Twitch chat I was going to be able to tame the Niobium volcano in my max colonization series with one steam turbine, I was met with heckles and tomatoes. Well, today is when we get to prove all the haters wrong. First things first, let's go over a couple of the key factors of the Niobium volcano, starting with where to find it. In this playthrough, which many of you may recognize as my max colonization series, it was found on the planetoid of Blastora. And it's taken quite a bit of work just to get down to it, because often when you land on Blastora, or generically called a superconductive asteroid, you're going to find that the entire top is filled with magma. So you have to move a bunch of magma until you can finally get to the point where you can unearth the Niobium volcano. A couple of very important things that you have to make sure when doing this is maintaining a vacuum in the planetoid. As you can see, I have some carbon dioxide in the planetoid right now, and that's because I just recently landed my rocket. But I figured it would be okay to start, because by the time I finish, the place should be vacuumed out. Now, many of you have seen me tame many metal volcanoes, and this one's not going to be too different. In fact, I've previously done an entire tutorial on taming metal volcanoes. I'll go ahead and put a link up in the corner, just in case you haven't seen it yet. But there are a couple of minor tweaks that you have to do to take into account the horrible narcissistic ways of the Niobium volcano. Starting with the fact that it forms tiles very easily. And if we take a look at the volcano itself, you can see that it erupts at a massive temperature of 3226 degrees. But even over here in the rest of the planetoid, where you can see that we have these veins of niobium, you get to see that it does form a tile at a very low density. Most of these tiles are around 27 kilos. We're going to start off by building the customary box. This one's going to be just a smidge wider, and that's because we have to get more equipment in here than we normally do. While I'm waiting for this area to vacuum out, I am going to make sure that I leave the box pretty much open so that the gas pumps can continue to do their work. I'm also going to start a low priority sweep because we don't want any materials in here. Now, one of the key differences in this volcano tamer is the fact that we're going to be using Thermium throughout. As you can see, I've brought almost 12 tons with me, and so I'll start by placing the cooling tile in this position here. Wait a minute, Echo. Thermium? What is it and how do I get it? Well, step one is you're going to want to find the superconductive asteroid. The reason being is because you need some of the niobium in order to make thermium. But fear not, you don't need very much at all. And that is a key phrase that I'm going to underscore and remind you throughout this video. You do not need much niobium at all. Let me show you what I mean. Here at our molecular forge on our home planetoid, you can see that I have a bunch of thermium queued up. We also see that its ingredients are niobium and tungsten. Wait a minute, Echo. Tungsten? Tungsten is just refined wolframite, and you can make that happen over at our metal refineries. Throughout most of my series, you'll see that I don't often touch wolframite, and this is the reason, because I want to turn 100% of it into tungsten, and that way I can turn 100% of it into thermium. So we have our 95 kilos worth of tungsten and our 5 kilos of niobium, and then whammo blammo, we're given 100 kilos worth of thermium, along with its massive overheat temperature bonus of 900 C. Once we have a little bit of thermium, we can then go back over to our metal refineries, and we can take 100 kilos worth of thermium and turn it into 100 kilos worth of niobium. So when you do land on the superconductive asteroid, all you have to do is grab 5 kilos worth of niobium. You bring it home, you make 100 kilos worth of thermium out of it, and then you turn that 100 kilos worth of thermium into niobium. Rinse and repeat. So as long as you have thermium, you now have niobium. In fact, the only thing that limits the amount of thermium that you can make is the wolframite. And fear not, you can get more wolframite at your glimmering asteroid fields. So once again, to reiterate, all you really need in terms of niobium is 5 kilos. Well then, Echo, why are we taming the Niobium volcano then if we only need 5 kilos and there's plenty on the planetoid itself? Well, because that's the sort of stuff we do in Oxygen Not Included, right? We're going to start by putting our standard thermal aqua tuner setup, once again underscoring the fact that we are building it out of thermium, because while you can probably get away with using steel, there's still a chance that it might break when the temperature ends up surging in here because of how hot the niobium comes out. For all the minerals, I am using obsidian, and then I'm going to be using a conduction panel to make sure that my steam turbine stays cool. Once again, using the best of the best, and that is thermium. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I am just going to link this cooling loop back in, but oftentimes if you're trying to do more things on the superconductive asteroid, you may want to extend this cooling loop to be able to keep other areas cool, which the thermal aqua tuner in this setup would be able to do with ease. I'm also going to be using a couple of thermium radiant liquid pipes. The thermium here is not necessary, but if you have something with a beautiful conductivity of 440 compared to something like steel that only has a 108, which even beats aluminum at only 205, you use it. For my automation wires, I am again using thermium, because at this point we're just showing off. Next up, we're going to start on our shipping, starting with the auto sweeper and the conveyor loader, once again both made out of thermium. And in fact, just for ease of rail running, I am going to put the conveyor loader over on this side, and that way I can run my rails a little bit better. Where yes, once again, I am using thermium. I finished the rail off with a conveyor chute that 100% does not need to be made out of thermium, and we'll tie some automation to it here in a little bit. Now, for the rails themselves, you can do a little bit of weaving, but do not run your rails in these 2 tiles. For the purpose of keeping it clean, I'm not running them in these 6 tiles, just because I think it would look a little bit awkward, and I thought this was the cleanest design I can come up with, at least with this shape. The last bit of equipment that we're going to need has to do with, like we said before, that niobium forms tiles at a very low density. And since this area is not going to be a vacuum, we're going to need a way to get rid of those tiles. And so we're going to be using a robo miner. Now in this case, just because I think it looks cool and symmetrical, I'm going to be using 2 robo miners. But when I go over some of the designs I've done before, you can get away with just 1. Now we're going to do something a little bit awkward here in the fact that I am going to build these tiles, deconstructing this one just to be able to build the robo miner. And then I'm going to deconstruct them and put this tile back. I need this tile because we're getting ready to fill this whole area up with water. Lastly, it's time to wire it up for power. Once again, you probably do not need to use thermium on this step, but at this point, it's just for funsies. On the outside of the tamer, we're going to go ahead and put in our steam turbine. Right smack dab in the middle. Once again, does not need to be made out of thermium, but I really like the shiny superconductive metal. And for my setup, I'm going to be putting in a smart battery along with a thermo sensor, and that way I can actually use the niobium volcano as sort of a heat battery, only draining the heat from the steam when the battery says we need it, or if the thermo sensor says it's entirely too hot in here. The automation is decent. We just go from the thermo sensor to the battery, and the battery to the steam turbine. And since I am adding a battery in a vacuum, I am going to need to add another conduction panel. But like I said, you do not need this smart battery. If you have some sort of other solution you want to use with your steam turbine's power, running it somewhere else, that's fine too. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I am making this tamer self-powered. Now that they have built the robo miner, I can go ahead and deconstruct these tiles and make sure I get everything swept up. The sweeping is very important before we end up putting the water in here. In fact, I also have to uncork this volcano before we get any water in here. As you've noticed, it has been trying to erupt, which means I'm at the point where I need to hurry because I can't let water touch an 1153 degree piece of rock. Otherwise we'd make steam, and then I would have a bad day in here because steam and 1000 degree obsidian and niobium is none of the buenos. So while I'm going to get ready for that, I am also going to be uncorking this volcano, sweeping up the igneous rock, analyzing the volcano, filling it with water, and sealing it all before its next eruption cycle. which, as you can see, without even analyzing it, it only erupts 73 seconds out of every 9,700 seconds, which means it erupts about once every 16 cycles. This is pretty standard fare for a niobium volcano. I just realized I put a liquid pipe element sensor in here as well. We of course need the liquid pipe thermo sensor. Really wish I could take that one back for the purposes of a tutorial that will hopefully be on YouTube for many, many years. And as the standard, I usually end up coming close to forgetting, I need to put my vent in for the condensed water coming out of the steam turbine, and I'm going to end up putting it right in this center position here. I will make the liquid vent itself out of thermium as well, and while you can get away with not putting it here, I like having the water come out here because it helps cool that niobium as quick as possible. I'm also using some higher priorities to be able to get everything in here done as fast as possible because of the critical timing before the situation gets from very bad to worse. Unfortunately, it does not look like my gas pumps are going to make it in time. I'm going to try adding yet another gas pump here because we still have 102 micrograms here inside our tamer. In fact, I'll put it down here, try to get it as close as possible. And then once you know all of the hot debris and the rock is gone, you can start dumping water. Now, the amount of water we're going to put in here is pretty important. As a quick reminder, volcanoes will not erupt if the steam pressure inside the tamer is above 150 kilos. But because the niobium volcano gets so hot, I want as much steam pressure in here in order to absorb that heat as possible. So I'm going to be putting 140 kilos worth of steam in every single tile. So how do I figure out how much that's going to be? Well, I have a 4-tile high room here. So I'm going to need 560 kilos worth of water in every bottom tile, and that way when it does flash into steam, it ends up being 140 kilos in every tile. Our water is coming in now. Notice I am not cooking the duplicants in a steam bath right now because we made sure to get rid of that igneous rock that was corking the volcano and all of the debris in here. You'll also want to make sure that if it's been a long time, that your insulated tiles are not too hot either. As you can see in some of these positions where they've been sitting against the magma for a while, this insulated tile is 442 degrees. So it could be pretty smart to remove all the tiles that are sitting around your tamer. So now I'm just waiting for 550, 560 kilos of water in every tile for Stan to finish analyzing the volcano and then just making some double checks. Because once this thing is closed, you're not getting back in it, well, without some serious effort. While they're working on that, I also need to fill this cooling loop. For that, we're just going to use an inline bottle drainer in this position here. I'm going to make it out of thermium. We have finished analyzing the niobium volcano and are given 13 databanks for our efforts. I am going to move them out of the way, although even the niobium couldn't melt them because they're made out of genetic ooze and do not melt until over 9,700 degrees. Now, when I am filling the cooling loop, I do want to make sure that the thermo aqua tuner does not turn on. So if you are using a power source that is connected to a grid that actually has power, make sure you reset your thermo sensor to a temperature it doesn't care about, or disconnect the thermo aqua tuner from the power grid. Because with the thermal aqua tuner spun up and you didn't catch it in time, it would transfer its heat very quickly into this water, make steam, and then you're going to have a bad day again. Didn't take too long. We have a full loop here. I can get rid of the bottle drainer. One last piece of automation I need while we're just waiting for the whole thing to fill up with water is going to be a timer sensor. We're going to use the timer sensor in order to control how often the conveyor chute opens and closes. And typically the strategy in a metal volcano tamer is you only want to open the chute enough to where we're barely getting out all of the metal that the volcano is creating, thereby leaving some metal on the rails. It makes sure that the steam turbine can take as much heat out of the 20 kilo chunks as possible, and that way when it gets to our metal tile, it's easier to cool down. But also, in the case of us using the smart battery setup, it's more material in here that heat can stay in, thereby increasing the benefit of having our sort of heat battery in here. It also allows the metal tile not to have to work as hard. And what I mean by that is your 20 kilo chunks of metal are going to come out of the tamer normally around 125 to 135 degrees, depending on how long you allow it to sit in here. Well, the rest of the job of cooling the metal to your desired end temp is going to be left to the metal tile. As the debris sits here waiting for the conveyor chute to open, it gets cooled even more. In our case, I'm choosing to make the niobium 20 degrees. But because we're working with niobium, it drains its heat very quickly, and so you do not have to keep this conveyor chute closed for very long in order to reach that 20 degrees. But we'll still do the math just so I can show you how you do it, just like we do it with the other metal volcano tamers. If we always want to keep some metal on that rail, and we know that chunks of metal are 20 kilos worth of debris, all we have to do, knowing that it's going to be 20 kilo chunks coming out of the conveyor chute at a clip, because that's how fast the conveyor loader shoots it out, is take that 20,000 grams and divide it by 1,527 grams. And we get a number of 13.09. In other words, I could open this once every 13 seconds, and we should always have a little bit of niobium still in the tamer. Now, with that being said, the big disclaimer about this tamer is you're not going to be getting 100% of the 319 kilos per second, and that's by design. So what I'm going to do is back this off to something pretty standard and say just once every 60 seconds. The longer you make that time, yes, the slower your niobium would come out, but also the less the thermal aqua tuner will have to work. We're doing great on time. We still have about 12 and a half cycles before this thing erupts again, and we're up to 380 kilos. Well, Echo, why would you want to build a volcano tamer that doesn't give me 100% of the metal coming out of the volcano? Again, as a reminder, you only ever need 5 kilos worth of niobium. So does it really matter? Also taking into the fact that this tamer will run for as long as you play the game. So for me, it doesn't matter in this case if I'm getting 100 kilos per second or 300 kilos per second. I'm never going to use it all anyways. Now I'm going to be somewhat careful to make sure that I do end up getting around that 550 kilos and not go over, because if I do end up going over, it will stifle the volcano. Not too big of a deal. You can always take some of the steam out, but it'll also make taming the whole thing a little bit easier as well. And 530 kilos. I'm going to use one more bucket. Here we are, 540 kilos. It's spreading out now. We're at 520 here. I think this is going to be just fine. I'm going to get rid of our bottle emptier, sweep this up, and look at that. We did end up getting our vacuum too. There's no way this is going to work out this seamlessly, right? Before I seal it up, I am double checking all of the connections, make sure I've done everything right, and I think everything looks good. Fingers crossed. Now let me wait about 11 and a half cycles before I can get this party started. Now, as a failsafe, I'm going to add a manual generator made out of thermium and get this whole thing charged first. And there's a very specific reason why. When this thing starts up, the niobium volcano is going to start erupting. Well, this area is going to be a vacuum, so the niobium is going to free fall into the water, ideally raising its temperature. Well, remember when I told you niobium has its curse? No, thermal aqua tuner, do not turn on. Well, remember when I told you that niobium has the curse of forming tiles? That's the reason why I have robo-miners in here. Well, in the case that it forms a tile here, and then forms a tile here, and forms a tile here, well, it would stop the niobium volcano from erupting, which it will do every single time it erupts when we fill this place with steam. I need to make sure I have some power in here before that happens, because I need enough thermal energy to flash all of this water so that way our equipment is sitting in a steam bath. It's one of the reasons why making everything out of thermium is important. One, so the robo miners do not overheat in their temporary vacuum. Since we made them out of thermium, they have an overheat temperature of 975. But two, just in case the temperature in this area ever goes above 300 and something degrees. Speaking of which, we're going to go ahead and set our thermosensor before I forget to make sure that the steam turbine turns on anytime this room is above 140 degrees. Why only 140? Because I want the temperature in here to be as low as possible. That way when the volcano does erupt, the steam turbine stands a chance at cooling the place down. If we kept it at, say, 250 degrees, and then the niobium volcano erupted, well, your steam turbine might have more problems getting these temperatures down low. A lot of these things are flexible, and your mileage may vary depending on your volcano. I'm playing it more safe, and that way you play it more safe to increase the chances of this whole setup working. We've got the battery charged, but I'm still going to keep the manual generator here because I still have another 11 cycles to go. So until then, I'm going to fast forward and get us to the party time. Very exciting times. The volcano's starting to get the rumble tummies, apparently erupting in 1.5 cycles. It's times like this that I wish I had a half speed button, especially as a YouTuber, because I only get one shot to record while this thing is erupting. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to wait another 15, 16 cycles, unless of course I want to do something like a voiceover, which it just doesn't hit the same, right? I'm also extremely lucky because this volcano is going dormant in 41 cycles, which means I only have 2 eruption cycles left. Otherwise, I would have had to wait another 60 cycles before it became active. Now, if you were connected to the grid, or if you had more time, you could have the thermal aqua tuner preheat the water, and that way this whole place was already a steam bath, which would make this a lot easier, but I at least want you to see that it can be done without any outside power influence. Here we go, we have 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. There's the first eruption, just like we thought. The tiles have already started forming. Notice that the steam is at 355 degrees. It's because just a little bit of the water was able to turn to steam. So there's not enough steam there to absorb until we have an entire steam bath, which is another good reason why you should preheat the bath, turning this whole thing into steam using the thermal aqua tuner connected to a grid. Or you could still do it with a manual generator. It would just take a little bit longer. All right, let's unpause. Notice this tile corks the volcano. Just as predicted, we're up to 20 kilos worth of steam, which is beautiful. The steam turbine has kicked on, and it looks like the hottest the RoboMiners got was around 200 to 300 degrees. I think it's safe to go ahead and turn on the thermal aqua tuner. Notice all those tiles forming as expected, which does temporarily cork the niobium volcano, but that is a good thing because it keeps the whole place from cooking itself. At this point, the steam is only at around 120 degrees, so you would still need the manual generator for a little while, just to make sure the RoboMiner can keep going. But this is exactly what we want to see. Now, all of the water has turned into steam. We're at about 135 degrees, so I could technically kick Kiku off the manual generator and deconstruct it because we are producing power on our own. So I will deconstruct the manual generator now. Notice the steam turbine is still going, and that is because the smart battery says I need some power. At the beginning, it will take a little bit more oomph from your thermal aqua tuner just to get your coolant down, but notice it's already at 11 degrees. Passing over the tile, it increases just a couple, and we have niobium coming out at 20 degrees. Now, some of the critics are going to say, well, I don't like this tamer because I don't get the 100% of niobium out. In fact, you're only getting a fraction. Well, here's my argument. Notice the conveyor loader is chocked full. It has a ton of niobium sitting in it, not to mention the niobium on the rails. So in just one eruption, we're able to get about a ton worth of niobium. And this has been the case in all my test examples as well. I do need to make sure I set the smart battery, that would help. 90-60 is good enough. And now all that heat will just stay in here until we get above 140 degrees or until the battery needs a little bit more power. Now, when you're designing your own, you do not necessarily need 2 RoboMiners, as I hinted at before. You could have sealed this whole thing off right here, making the tamer even smaller. I kind of like the 2 RoboMiners though, because it gets rid of the stuck tile quicker. This is the one tile that matters that we want to blast as soon as possible. So while this RoboMiner could be working on a tile over here, which would end up taking a second, this RoboMiner might be able to uncork the volcano sooner, giving us more niobium for our effort. To underscore it the last time, Even if you only have one robo-miner, and you don't get as much niobium out of the volcano as possible, you're still getting more niobium than you will ever be able to use. I'm going to fast forward this just for a few minutes so you can see the giant pile of niobium that we have collected, also proving that the battery and steam turbine will provide enough power to continue cooling all of this niobium, which is another advantage of having, in this case, the 132.4 kilos worth of steam pressure. Just means there's more potential power for the steam turbine to keep the battery charged. Here it is a few cycles later. We're up to about 1,080 kilos worth of niobium. I did reset the timer a couple times just to sort of speed up the process, which does raise the temperature of the metal tile a little bit. The thermal aqua tuner cools it down, and the niobium's still sitting at 20 degrees. I also wanted to highlight a couple more designs to show you the proof in the pudding of how rock solid these tamers are, and to show you some of the tweaks that you could do to customize it to your needs. For instance, this first one here uses 2 steam turbines, has no battery, and everything works just fine. It provides enough power for the thermal aqua tuner to keep the niobium cool, and enough power for the robo-miner to keep the volcano uncorked, along with the auto sweeper and conveyor loader whenever it needs to do its work. And this volcano here has produced me a total of a little over 10 tons of niobium. This one here does have the double robo-miners. I also added another battery. If you wanted to maintain power in between eruptions, or perhaps you're powering another part of your colony with it, add more batteries. And that way, when it is too hot in here, and the thermo sensor says, hey, you need to turn on, you're not just wasting the power coming off the steam turbine. This setup has been running long enough to give me 5 tons of niobium. Now, for some of you, this use case may not be good enough. You may want the full output of the niobium volcano for whatever your nefarious plans are. And nefarious they must be, because niobium volcanoes do not play. If we take the eruption period of 73 seconds, multiply it times 319.3 kilos per second, we would find out that every time this volcano erupts, it would produce 23.3 tons worth of niobium. What, pray tell, are you going to do with all of that niobium from just one eruption? Please let me know down in the comments below. But if a ton to a ton and a half of niobium per eruption fits your needs, this is one possible solution. And as I close out this video, let me go through the overlays just one more time for a quick and easy reference. Please let me know what you think of this tamer down in the comments below. And also let me know if you'd be interested in a much more robust design that could handle the 23-ton eruption. So until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.